In this emergency post-budget exclusive, the ex-Chancellor of the UK has just exposed Labour's budget as a far-left socialist agenda.
You know, from a kind of socialist undergraduate student point of view, they just went after capital. But of course, they don't say that because they would lose a lot of votes. So they can't overtly say, we believe in a socialist state. But they will, you know, secretly, in my view, try and work towards that.
This was the highest tax hike in a budget in 31 years. We are at record levels of taxation, and the ex-Chancellor of the UK believes it's only going to get worse and worse. So, Kwasi, any shockers for you in the budget?
So it was a pretty extraordinary and surreal experience for me because obviously I've been there and there was huge market turbulence and we know what happened, and then I was sacked and Liz Truss resigned and all of that. So it was odd seeing it on television because it was the first budget in many years when I haven't been an MP. And actually, to be fair to the government, they pretty much did what Labour governments generally do.
Doesn't make it right, though, does it?
No, it doesn't. But it wasn't a surprise. So what they did was they hiked up taxes by £40 billion, which was in fact more than they even they'd leaked that morning, because I read a report in the Times which suggested they'd raise taxes by 35 billion. So they did a bit more.
And is that a lot for a budget, 40
it's
billion?
It's a huge amount. So I think
Right.
it's the biggest hike since 1993. Wow. And that was at the back of a recession. We were coming out of a recession and there was a deficit. We hiked, the Tories actually hiked up taxes. I think it was Norman Lamont.
Right.
Rachel Reeves hiked them up by more in real terms, but sort of more in nominal terms, but in real terms, in terms of the size of the economy, a bit less. But it's, 1993 is now 31 years ago. So if you can imagine what that tax take will do, from my point of view, I think it will be very harmful. So if you look at the measures, it was pretty much clear to me that they couldn't put up national insurance on employees, and they couldn't put
because they're working people.
Exactly. So
that was their rhetoric.
That was their thing. It was, and I've written about this. I mean, it was very much couched in class war socialistic terms. So people, who study politics at university or economics will know that from a Marxist point of view, and he got that from Ricardo, you've got three classes. So you've got landowners who get rent from their tenants. You have capitalists who essentially employ capital,
yeah.
And you've got labour, and you learn that in your kind of first year of uni and all of that. And it was obvious to me when they said we're not going to tax working people, they were going to have to tax, and they did that pretty punitively yesterday. They were going to have to tax capital. Now, in this instance, capital is employers. So the national insurance contributions that employers make went up from 13.8, I think, to 15%. Huge cost.
Yeah.
So that'll be 25 billion. That's what it's scored at.
Wow.
25 billion of the 40 billion, 60 odd percent, 62%.
Is from employers.
It's from employers.
Employers.
That's right. Employers.
Who give employees jobs.
That's right. So we'll talk about that. So that was the big hike. There were other taxes on capital, so inheritance. And the sadness really.
Capital gains.
Yeah, and capital gains. So from a kind of socialist undergraduate student point of view, they just went after capital because they said they weren't going to tax hardworking people in inverted commas.
Yeah.
So that just left them, to essentially, if I may use this metaphor, you take the baseball bat to capital and to risk takers, entrepreneurs.
But does that not do the opposite of growing an economy?
I think there are two problems with that. I think one is that you disincentivize people from becoming entrepreneurs, from becoming people who employ others and set up businesses. And the other thing is that entrepreneurs and business people will have to absorb the cost. But in many instances, if they're selling products, they will pass through some of those costs to consumers. So if you're putting taxes on businesses, you're actually going to increase the price of the services and goods that the businesses offer. So ultimately, the consumer will pay a lot of that. And the other thing that will happen is that entrepreneurs won't hire as many people because we used to call it a jobs tax when I was a backbencher. Conservative. Labour's job tax. You're essentially taxing people for employing other people.
Because they put the minimum wage up as well, didn't they?
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's a separate measure. And you're also going to it also means that the employers you do have are less likely, frankly, to get wage increases. So they're going to have lower wages.
So it ends up being the working people that end up paying for it anyway.
Exactly. They'll pay for it as consumers because, the businessmen will pass through the costs of the products.
Do they not know this? Surely they must know this.
I don't think they care, actually. And also what the problem was that they'd boxed themselves in because they said they weren't going to put taxes up on working people. I'm sure she'd have liked to put up income tax, certainly at the higher rate or what have you. They had to go down this path. Now, the fact that it has these bad consequences, and it was the OBR, neutral OBR, said 60% of the 25 billion that they were going to take from employers would be borne ultimately by working people in the form of consumers and people earning wages. So, but I don't think they cared about that. What they care about, and I've obviously been there, is getting the money to pay for the welfare state or what other projects.
Potholes.
1
million
everything,
potholes.
All of that, and actually, to be fair, you could argue, plausibly, that our public services need more money. But the way to do that, the way to fund that, is by growing the economy.
Yeah.
And that's my problem fundamentally with this budget, was that I didn't see any growth plans whatsoever. And but
they kept saying we're about growth, investment, entrepreneurship.
Yeah, all of that.
We're about growth, investment, entrepreneurship.
They did, and then they taxed the very people that are going to drive growth.
So is this just a marketing exercise?
Yeah, a bit of. And also, I think that they're not very transparent about what they actually believe. I don't think they genuinely think, many people on the left, that entrepreneurs, business owners drive growth. They essentially think that that's a function of the state and state intervention. They
think the state drives the growth.
Yeah. They think
by taking the money off the entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and investing in, you could invest in,
But where would they get the money from if it wasn't for the entrepreneurs?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. But I suppose they think, and I remember many of your viewers or audience will remember Tony Benn, and he died many years ago now, I think about 11 years ago, but his view was essentially, and I remember having a discussion with him about this, he lived through the war, and he said, well, what you don't understand is that we planned to win the war. So the state basically took control of everything and we won the war. That's his argument. So why can't we do that in peacetime? Why can't we have a state-led economy that can plan and invest, in inverted commas, its way to growth? And it's bonkers, but that's very much his mindset. And I think a lot of the left now still privately believe that. Now, they know that if they...
Do they believe that, or do they just dislike entrepreneurs?
I think it's a bit of
who
both.
Are self-made, who earn well?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think there's that envy, and I think there's a natural bias on the left to state, the state apparatus, civil service jobs, civil service type pensions, highly unionized labor. And they're not particularly interested, I would suggest, in entrepreneurs, in business people, in entrepreneurship generally. But of course, they don't say that no Labour politician is going to say, actually, I don't believe in because they would lose a lot of votes. There are lots of small business owners in this country. And I think one of the strengths of Britain traditionally is that we've got individuals who've got the nous and the capacity to go out and set up businesses. That's very much part of how Britain evolved. And so they can't overtly say that we don't believe that. We believe in a socialist state. But they will, secretly, in my view, try and work towards that.
So do you think they've gone more left?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I speak to MPs, colleagues of mine who were Labour MPs, and they were Labour MPs under Tony Blair. And they'll tell you that this Labour government is significantly to the left of New Labour in '97. I think that Blair, for all his faults, was very keen to listen to Middle England, Middle Britain. I think that this government is really setting itself against Middle Britain. Taxing schools on private schools, taxing fees on private schools with VAT, That's a tax on aspiration, putting up employers' national insurance contributions, which is a tax on small business essentially. Anyone employing more than 4 or 5 people will be adversely affected by it.
This recent budget should warn you that your pension is not safe and secure, and they're coming for your inheritance. Do you even know how much is in your pension or where your pension is invested? Add to this the recent inheritance tax grab on your pensions and the risk of a market crash. You probably didn't know this, and I didn't until recently, but physical gold can be added to your pension pot. Gold is inheritance tax free and has grown 700% in the last 20 years. You probably know from my content I'm investing heavily in silver and gold, and that's why I've partnered with Direct Bullion. Myself and Nigel Farage are brand ambassadors, and Direct Bullion can help you with gold to protect and grow your pension. I buy my gold and silver from Direct Bullion, and I don't earn any money on any purchases of gold or silver if you buy direct from Direct Bullion. So if you go to robmore.directbullion.com, you can get a great price on your silver and gold, and you can get the pension gold investing guide completely for free. As you know, I don't do many strategic partnerships. And when I do them with people who are credible, who've been doing it a long time, who invest in things that I invest in too. And gold and silver's going wild. I'm investing heavily in gold and silver, and I recommend you check out robmore.directbullion.com. And let me just put this into context, because I don't think people understand this. I saw a lot of people saying, oh, it wasn't that bad. A 1.2% increase on 13.8% is actually a 9% increase, not a 1.2% increase, exactly, which is important. And as they reduced the threshold, they stealth taxed you at the bottom under the radar, because you've got less relief before your national insurance kicks in. So it actually works out, for us, it works out at about 15% increase in national insurance from what it was, which is over £80,000 it's going to cost my business with 100 staff locally. I
think a lot of, and actually you can see if it's going to cost you 80,000, your ability to employ more people, your ability to increase people's wages, your ability to keep your costs down for the end consumer, consumer of your products, all of those things will be made worse,
considerably
worse. And so I think with respect to their plan, I don't think they really believe in entrepreneurship. I think they think that state control is better. Certainly the far left do. I mean, they would be open about that.
But do they not look at other state-controlled countries which are communist states? Do they not see what happens?
Yeah, and I think that, I find it extraordinary. I mean, to try and get into the mindset, they obviously think it's Marx. It goes back to Marx. So the whole notion that Marx suggested, and before Marx, there was a guy called Ricardo. So we talked about the 3 classes. We talked about, landowners who charge rent. We talk about capitalists who get profits, and we talked about workers who get wages. Those are in that model. And the whole point about Marx was that he basically said the capitalists are exploiting the workers. So what the workers produce is taken too much of it. The capitalist gets more than his or her fair share of the product of the labor's work, and so that's unfair. So what you end up doing in socialism is essentially getting rid of the capitalist class. That's the kind of pure model. So, but
then how do you get labour growth if you get rid of the capitalist class?
Well, then the state employs everybody. I mean, we had that in the Soviet Union. I mean, you're old enough to remember that. That was basically what they had.
And how does that end?
It's very bad.
It never ends well.
But in terms of the mindset of, because they realise, I think, unless they're totally crazy, they're not going to get a fully socialist state in Britain in one generation. It'll take time. But what a lot of them do is say, well, being you hear it all the time. It's like it's unfair. Businesses are making too much money. Workers' rights, all of these things, and it's coming from a socialist mindset, which basically thinks that entrepreneurs, capitalists in inverted commas, are bad, and the workers are good. Now, what I can't stand about it is that the way in which and you love your history, the way in which Marx and Ricardo, all these people, these thinkers, set it up is that the interests of these classes are against each other. So if you're a capitalist, that means you're anti-worker. But In reality,
You need each other.
of course they do.
And I actually want all my staff to make loads of money.
Of course they do.
Because then I do.
Of course you do. But that was where Marx got it completely wrong. He set these classes up against each other. And I think all of socialism is based on this notion that the interests of one class are completely different to the interests of another class. And that's why, I wrote a piece about this is essentially class war. If we kick the middle class and the aspirational people, the strivers, and give it all to the workers, that's nirvana. That's what we should do. And I said, this is complete nonsense.
Yeah.
Because the interests of middle class people and people who, are in their first job are the same. Everyone wants to do well, as you said. You run a business, but you want the people who work in the business to do well. And they probably want you to do well, because otherwise they won't get bonuses and they won't get, pay increases. So the interests of these people are of these different classes, I wouldn't even think of them in that category, are much more aligned than the Marxist doctrine. And that's why I wanted, because I'm interested in history of ideas and that sort of thing. And I wanted to talk about that because that's where the socialist mindset is coming from. And we'll see this, and we can discuss this, I'm sure, later, in the election in the United States next week, where essentially I think you've got two different visions of how an economy works. And the Democrats, certainly under this candidate, are actually pretty left. And they think a lot of
things like taxing unrealized gains.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know what could be more socialist.
No, it's
taxing
crazy.
Potential profits.
And I remember, he was a very skilled politician, but I remember Obama let the cat out of the bag because he was asked about, somebody said, look, I've done a business, I'm growing the business. And he said, you didn't grow that business. It was the state that grew the business. The state provided roads. The state provided infrastructure. The state, and it's like,
but who provided the money to the state?
Yeah. This is completely a socialistic vision.
Yeah, because people say, sorry to jump in, but
no, not at all.
I see this all the time. You see government funded. There is no government funded.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Taxpayer funded. There is no government funded.
Well, if you always have that in the back of your mind, you see a lot of how nonsensical a lot of this thinking is. But the reason I was talking about, the Marxist mindset and all of this stuff is that is very much the starting point of a lot of this.
And you think America's similar to the UK? They're going very left.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the because I came out of Parliament this summer, and I saw the campaign, and you get a much broader sense when you're not actually a candidate. When you're a candidate, you're knocking on doors and you're in your constituency and you're looking rightly on very micro things. But when you step out, you can see the broad sort of outline of the campaign. And what was extraordinary to me was they just refused, Labour. And the media, I'm afraid, allowed them to do this. They refused to engage with any of the issues. And this was what, in 1997, was termed the Ming Vase strategy. And I'll just explain that. This is like someone likened the Labour campaign in 1997 to a person carrying a very valuable Ming vase across a very polished floor. So you've got to be very, very careful. You don't want to slip up. You've got to be very, very cautious, and you've got to get this Ming vase to the other side of the room. And it was quite a good description because it meant that it described how cautious they were, how reluctant they were to get into any kind of debate, how reluctant they were to say anything actually about what their plans were.
Might the Ming Vase strategy have helped you when you were Chancellor?
Well, no. I think where we went wrong, and I look back on it with
because you sort of ran across the floor with it.
It was too much. Exactly.
Yeah.
You've got to be very cautious. And I was asked. I think it was this morning actually about whether why didn't the markets react as much? They trailed everything. It's because they trailed everything they were going to do. There was a newspaper story about.
Right.
So there was nothing unexpected.
So there was no shock.
No.
Yeah.
No. So they did all their socialist stuff, but it was kind of already baked in because people knew that that's what they were going to do.
Yeah.
I think in the long term it will be damaging.
Yeah.
But in the immediate, the immediate reaction was it wasn't subdued actually. I mean, the people are selling off British government paper that people see that the market sees there will be a problem, but because ours was very rushed and kind of rabbit out of the hat type. Which was the wrong thing to do. I think Labour have done the opposite. They've taken 4 months. They got in July. It's now nearly November. and they essentially have decided to try everything out, so that everyone knew exactly roughly where they were going with this, and that's why. And we should have done more of that.
So I want to come back to America in a moment.
Yeah.
It's interesting time for America, but ultimately, what do you think is the state of the UK right now? And after this budget, where's it going?
Look, I'm quite pessimistic, because I think, and it's just not just a UK problem. I know, we live in an island state, and we're very much focused on our problems. But actually, the problems that the UK faces are faced by nearly every country in Europe. Certainly the big major economies in Europe, like France, like Germany, like Italy, face similar problems. And what fundamentally the problem is that all these countries have built up very generous welfare states, which costs billions and billions a year to maintain. National health service. They don't all have national health service, but the health provision, pensions, welfare benefits, all the things that a modern state provides. But the problem is that they're not growing. Their economies aren't growing, certainly as fast as the United States. They're not growing as fast as the United States. And they're not growing fast enough, really, to pay for the public services that they want, that the people want. Because it's very difficult to reduce public spending once it's on a path. So the way to deal with that is to grow the economy so that your tax revenues can cover your expenditure, what you want to spend on. If you don't do that, if your economy is stagnating or isn't growing as fast, you get into the situation that we saw yesterday, where the state, the government, is trying to increase taxes to get more revenue. But the problem with that is that if you increase taxes, that actually damages your ability to grow the economy. And so you're in what Liz Truss called, and I think Rachel Reeves also called it when she was in opposition, a doom loop. So because you're not growing, you have to raise taxes,
which hinders growth.
Yeah. So that's the doom. And I'm afraid, and time will tell, but I'm afraid I think we're on this path where I don't think they're going to get the growth in the next 2 or 3 years that they need. And the risk for them is that in 2 years' time, they come up with more tax rises, which will damage the economy more, impair the ability of the economy to grow.
Now, I've been on a mission for 17 years to help as many people on this planet get better financial knowledge. If, like me, you'd like to make, manage and multiply more money, I recommend that you join my digital financial freedom platform. It's really easy to join. You just type in rob.team. There you're going to learn my 4 M's of making, managing, maintaining and multiplying more money. And the even better news is there's no risk to you, because it costs less than 20 pence a day to join. You can cancel anytime. Join right now. I'll also give you my 12-week Money Mastermind University completely for free. It exposes the banking system and teaches you how to play them at their own game. If you join rob.team right now, you get that completely for free. Just type in rob.team. We'll see you inside with the 10,000 other members in rob.team. Would you say it's inevitable that there's more tax rises coming?
I'd be surprised if they, because they've got to grow the economy at 2% a year, really. And the OBR revised down its projection for growth. The OBR isn't the be all and end all, but it was interesting that they did that. And if for whatever reason there's a shock to the global economy, God forbid, like COVID, but it doesn't even have to be as severe as that. For what, the global economic cycle doesn't turn out well. There's some geopolitical stress somewhere in the world. Oil prices, gas prices go up, energy prices, and they slow growth. There are lots of things that can go wrong, which is outside the government's control, but will affect us here in the UK. And if for whatever reason that happens, we're not going to get the growth that we need. And in order to pay for all the stuff that we're paying for, they will probably have to increase taxes. Because one thing we know about Labour is that there's absolutely no appetite on their part to reduce public expenditure, or even to hold it, to reduce the growth in public expenditure. They are totally committed to spending the money. And if they can't get the money through economic growth, they will get it through you and me and businesses and like they did yesterday.
But then, since lockdown, every year, the amount of millionaires leaving this country is pretty much doubled.
Yes.
And every entrepreneur I speak to, bar none, and I know loads, they're either saying, I can't go because I'm stuck here, but I would, or I'm planning it, or I'm already gone.
Yeah, that's the other risk, is that if there's a perception that you can't really grow an economy or grow a business, more particularly in the UK, if there's a perception that you're paying way too much tax, people can vote with their feet by leaving the country.
And Dubai, they've just pledged 230 billion to grow that economy.
Yeah, and it's not even as far as Dubai. I mean, you look at places like Italy or Portugal, they have deals where essentially, I think in Italy, you pay 200,000 a year and that's it. I mean, it's a huge amount of money, but for people with mega bucks, exactly, for people with mega bucks, they can afford that, and it's transparent. They know that that's what they pay.
Didn't Lisbon, Portugal start talking about not taxing under 35s?
Yep, to attract talent.
Sounds smart to me.
And it is clever. And that's the danger we're in, because actually, even more than, when we were in our 20s, people are looking, they can go anywhere. And also people can work from home, they can work from anywhere. So people are asking themselves, well, why do I have to be in London? Why can't I go to Portugal, where the cost of living is much less and the weather's better? And the Portuguese government are actually attracting me by giving me tax breaks. So it's a much more, a mobile workforce in many ways than it was 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And that's the world that we're in.
Wow. So is this the start of the end of the UK?
No, I mean, look, the UK's been around for, 220 years?
Yeah, but we used to have the reserve currency. We don't anymore. We're nowhere near that. We used to have an empire. We don't anymore. We're dropping down the rankings on every major metric.
I am long-term, and this is why I'm very disappointed about what happened to me in politics, was that actually I think that fundamentally, if you look at Britain's history and the way people are, very individualistic. People, outsiders, foreigners will think British people are quite eccentric, sense of humor, all those sort of stereotypes. But underlying that is a real risk-taking appetite, is a real innovation, originality. If you think of all the inventions that were here have been developed here in the UK, it's amazing. And our universities are second to none. But I think the state, over decades now, and both parties have been largely responsible for this, have really undermined.
Stifled it.
Yeah, that's a good word to use. They've stifled the creative energies and innovative, spirit of the people. And I think we can get back to that. But I think in order to get back to that, we need to do what I tried to do, but we botched it, I have to say. But we've got to have a credible strategy to try and reduce tax burdens, to incentivize the kind of entrepreneurial activity that we've been talking about.
So would you try and lure back then some of these great entrepreneurs?
Definitely.
Like, people like Dyson, who used to live here and has gone.
Definitely.
And all these billionaires, so they've gone.
Definitely. So we've got to have a plan to attract the most talented people, the inventive people, and to keep the ones we've got.
Yes.
That's even more important, because there are people here in this country that can do all these great things, but they leave. So we've got to have a plan to do that. It's not something that could be done overnight. I think that was the mistake I made and Liz Truss made. It's not something that could be done, just in one fell swoop. It's got to be a strategic plan to try. And we did this. I mean, I think in many instances, if you look at what Margaret Thatcher did in the 80s, she did. I mean, there were bad things, I suppose. There was some social unrest, but the broad direction of what she was trying to do was 100% right. And we need to do some sort of version of that where we incentivize people and we encourage them and we reward them for success, as opposed to penalizing them when they do well.
So let's talk about America then, because obviously we're very close to a huge event in America. Nigel's convinced Trump will win. Trump's told Nigel Trump will win. I think
of course he's going to say that. He's never going to say, Donald Trump is never, ever going to tell anybody, oh, I think I'm going to lose. Or
True.
That's just not his style.
True. So do you think Trump will win, and do you think that's good?
Look, I think Donald Trump will probably win. And I think broadly, in terms of the economy, their economy, in terms of the woke agenda, pushing back against that, I think that's a better outcome, frankly, than the Democrats. And also the other thing about the Democrats is that, I get the whole kind of identity politics thing. She's a black, half Indian lady and all of that. But it's very unclear to me what they are actually going to do. I strongly suspect that if she were to win next week, they would do a version of what Labour did yesterday. I think they would hike up business taxes. I think they would introduce measures that will disincentivize entrepreneurship. And I think for the American economy as a whole, that would be a bad thing. And also, they've been a disaster. I mean, this is sort of pressing Donald's points, but it's true. They've been very poor on the border and all of that sort of thing. So I think the Democratic agenda would be bad.
So do you think one of the reasons that the economy did largely well with Trump is because he's actually run businesses?
Yeah.
He understands real business. He's not a blackboard economist. He runs businesses.
He's not a theorist or an academic, but that's why he's successful.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of his measures, I mean, the thing I loved, and I wish I could have done this, is when he reduced corporation tax, I think from 39% to 21%.
And that's a massive drop.
It was a massive, it almost halved it. But actually, guess what? There was huge amounts of growth on the back of that. Now, all the models of the OBR and all that sort of thing would say, okay, if you halve the rate, you're gonna drastically reduce the amount of corporation tax that you get into the kitty. But actually, he said, no, you're incentivizing business, you're incentivizing growth, and you'll actually get more money.
Well, I agree with that. As an entrepreneur, when taxes are high, I hold as much money as I can. When taxes are low, I spend as much money as I can. It's basic.
It's very basic.
So at the moment, my companies and personally, I'm holding a lot of money, not wanting that major tax event.
Exactly right.
If we were flat 20% tax across the board and everything, it'd all come out. I'd be drawing it all just in case they change it again. Yeah, and that's all going to be thrown out into the economy.
So I think, and the other area where I think Donald Trump is very different, and we haven't even talked about this, is his energy policy. So I think the Democrats, obviously they're big into renewables, they're big into the fight against climate change, and that's all very well. But the problem with that is that it just requires government subsidy. And guess what? What does government subsidy mean? That's more tax. And it's higher costs of energy. And one of the things we've seen actually in Europe, in Germany in particular, the reason why that country is almost flirting with a recession and is growing very slowly is their energy costs have gone through the roof, largely because most of the gas they were getting was from Russia. And now they've embargoed Russia and they've had to get other sources. And that's a price they're paying. And I think Donald Trump will do two things. One, he'll reduce taxes. He will also encourage energy production. And of course, a lot of companies rely on cheap energy. So if you're a company which needs a lot of energy, and he's going to cut your taxes, your corporation taxes, and also he's going to make the energy cheaper, that's a good thing, and that could boost growth. I think it will, and I think that the way in which a lot of that debate is couched in the UK and in Europe, again, is very much more. Oh, well, we need to we have wind farms. We need to have lots of renewables. And I was responsible for a lot of that because I was the energy secretary, as the business secretary. But I think there's a limit to how much people are prepared to pay in terms of energy costs to make the planet green. I think there's a realism. It's a balance that you need to strike. And I think Donald Trump, in terms of basically all the businessmen I know, secretly want Trump to win, because they can see that that's going to be a good thing for business and the American economy. They can't say it publicly in many instances because a lot of their workforce are Gen Z types who don't share that political view.
If you don't believe we're at the start of the end of the UK, what's the solution to make Great Britain great again? So
this is what I've said. I mean, I think we need to essentially get what we tried to do in October 2022. We need to stage it. So maybe you'd start off with trying to reduce burdens on business. We haven't even talked about some of the legislation that Labour are thinking about introducing in terms of so-called workers' rights, which is just
So
another
you mean
tax on
don't
business.
message me after 5 o'clock and on the weekends?
That stuff, and I've got a right to work from home every day, and
from day one, you can't fire me.
You can't fire me, and I've got maternity leave rights.
This is definitely socialism, isn't
from
it?
day one. I mean, it's a huge cost on business, and actually, it'll have a sort of reverse effect in that businesses will be reluctant to hire people again.
And workers will become more entitled and
that's right, and
less productive.
Exactly right. So that's the danger. And again, as I say, I was struck with this when I was in government. It's that old Marxist mindset. The workers are in one camp, and the employers are in another camp, and somehow these two, tribes are in a perpetual war.
Tribes,
yeah. But that's how
tribal
they see
war.
That's
yeah,
right. That's. I mean, I try and put it in as vivid a way as possible, but I think that is absolutely at the core of Marxist thinking, of Marx. If you read Marx, that's what he's talking about. It's all about class war, class struggle. It's all about workers being exploited by capitalists and their interests being fundamentally opposed to each other. And I think that mindset has infected socialism. I mean, it's what socialism is based on.
Yeah.
And I think it's completely the wrong way to think about society.